Hi, this is Bob. In the first 4 parts of this introductory series of Daylight tutorials, I covered the process of setting up a new job, creating a Daylight scene, and then importing media into it, so I could edit the metadata, use color grading tools to add basic looks, and also sync separately recorded audio files to the pictures. Now we have a graded set of synced dailies, I want to render them out, so they can be used in an editing system such as Avid, Final Cut or Premiere Pro. Daylight provides another preset workspace for this part of the workflow. We can select it from the Views menu or by pressing Ctrl-Shift-5 on the keyboard. This is the Render workspace, and it consists of 2 views at the top with the Shots view and Play controls below. On the left is the Render view. This contains all the settings required to render out the deliverables. And on the right is the Queue monitor, which provides a list and the current status of rendering operations, and also includes controls to allow us to manage and prioritize the renders. As with many things in Daylight, we can use templates to very quickly set up preset operations, to render a set of dailies for Avid, for example. However, I'm going to go through the settings manually, so you know what they all do. Firstly, at the top of the render view, we need to specify the range or ranges of frames we want to render. We can choose to render all shots, selected shots, shots from a filtered list, or shots which contain certain categories. Now, some of these items we haven't yet covered, but for now I'm going to choose all shots, all frames. And now up here you can see the number of frames which will be rendered. Next, I need to choose the type of output, either frame sequences or movie files. If I choose sequences, I can then select different types of frame, DPX, JPEG, EXR, and so on. For this example, I'm going to choose to render movies with both video and audio. I now have to select the type of movie file I want to render. As my editing system is an Avid, I'm going to choose the Avid MXF option. But there are several other file types in this list to support pretty much any type of workflow. Having specified the movie file type, I now need to set the video and audio codecs. The options in these lists will vary according to the movie file type you've chosen. I'll select DNxHD36 as this set of deliverables is for an offline edit. However, I'll choose 24-bit audio as the audio will be used for the final sound mix. By default, 2 channels of audio will be rendered, but I can change that by opening the audio channel setting from this drop-down list. As the shots have different numbers of audio channels, I'll select Auto. Next, I have to specify various video rendering options. The video render settings are accessed by clicking on this drop-down list button. For many of these, the default option will be fine, but I can check them all by selecting Add All from this list. First of all, we can choose the output resolution. The default is the same as our scene format, in this case 1920 by 1080, which is fine, but if I wanted to render to a different frame size, I could choose it from this list. If the format you need isn't in this list, you can create a new one using the Formats editor. I'll cover that in another tutorial. Now, as the render format I've chosen is the default, I can hide this option by clicking on its label. Notice the red strike-through line indicating that the option can be hidden. If the option is not set to its default value, it can't be hidden. The next option is the proxy resolution. This is only really relevant when rendering smaller proxy versions of very large sequence files. For example, you may have a 4K VFX pipeline, but only want to render 2K DPX files to act as proxies during the initial stages of the workflow. I'll leave this option set to its default and hide it. Now I have to set the correct color space for my deliverable. By default, this will match the color space I've been grading in. However, I don't want to render in that color space. Instead, I'm going to choose Rec 1886 2.4 Gamma with Rec 709 primaries, which is a standard color space available on most displays used in post-production. Note that the output colour space I've chosen is not the same as the colour space I used to view the images while I was grading, as my local monitor is an sRGB display. However, the rendered Rec. 709 images will look the same, as Daylight automatically applies an appropriate colour space conversion. If you're creating deliverables for a different display, such as a P3 projector for example, or maybe linear files to send to a VFX department, then you should use a different output colour space. As I said, colour spaces are an important part of any post-production workflow, and we have other tutorials covering the subject. Okay, I'll hide the next few options as the default settings for frame rate, layers and tracks, and masks are all okay. The TrueLight option allows us to apply a specific lookup table or LUT to the rendered output. This may be necessary if you had a viewing LUT enabled while grading your footage. It can also be used to apply a customized color space conversion to your deliverables. However, in Daylight this generally applies to more specialist workflows. If you need more information about TrueLight lookup tables and specific color space issues, then please check out the documents and other resources available on our website. Again, I'll hide this option for now. The next option allows us to add a burn-in to the deliverables. This can be useful as a way to communicate and synchronize various metadata to subsequent stages in the workflow, especially offline editing, VFX, and sound departments. However, as the metadata is physically rendered into the output images, it can become distracting, and it may not be practical to have a burn-in throughout the whole shot. It's therefore possible to flash the burn-in data onto just a few frames. For example, I can choose to add it to just the first second of each rendered shot. The Video LUT option allows us to choose whether the black to white output range covers the full code range available in the output format, or just the legal video range. You may need to check if there are any special requirements for the file format and codec you've chosen, and also what the destination system will be expecting in order to correctly set this option. For example, I'm going to set it to full to legal scaling, as I've created all my graded images with full range video, but I know the Avid editor has stated that they want legal range DNx HD files. The built-in scopes in Daylight and most editing systems will help you to get this right, but it's always a good idea to do some tests if you have time, ideally by rendering some color bars or ramps to check the levels are what you expect on the target system. The metadata settings specify what data is written into the header of the output files in terms of timecode, tape ID, and clip name. In many cases, the shot defaults are appropriate, but other options can be selected according to your workflow. Now, I haven't been using the cache on this system, so we'll ignore the cache setting for now and just hide this option, but this will be covered in a separate workflow tutorial. The last two options determine what will happen if for some reason there is missing source material. And again, I'll leave these set to their default options. Okay, so that's all the output and rendering options set. We now have to tell Daylight where to put the rendered files. The location and file name of the first file which will be rendered is shown here. As you can see, it'll be currently rendered back to my USB drive and put into a directory path related to the location of my source footage. This path has been created automatically from these options above. However, if I want to render to a different directory or change the way the output files are named, I can change these options. First of all, I can change the output location to be something other than the scene container, which, if you remember, is the root path to all the source footage. I'll change it to the system root. Now the output path is being set primarily by this preset template. The %J is a special code which is replaced in the output path with the current job name. There's then an explicit subdirectory called _renders, and after that a %S code which is substituted with the current scene. If I don't want to use this preset template, I can manually type in a path or I can create another template using other substitution codes. In this case, I'm going to click on the File Browser button to select a specific output location. Now I've connected a Thunderbolt RAID to this system, which I'm going to use for the rendered footage. So I'll choose the RAID in the drop-down volumes list and then create a new directory in the existing Daylight training directory on the RAID. In fact, I'll create a directory and then a subdirectory for this day's footage. Note that Daylight is warning me that the directory I've chosen cannot be found, but that's okay. It will create both a directory and subdirectory if they don't exist. Now if we check the first file to be rendered, we can see that it's going to be volumes, TB RAID, Daylight Training, Lurchenburg, Day 7, 1920 by 1080. The last subdirectory is the resolution of the output files. This may be required by certain systems or workflows. However, in our case it's not necessary, so I'll remove it by turning off the resolution directory button. Okay, we've now set the required output path the way we want it for our current workflow. Next we have to tell Daylight how we want to name the rendered files. By default, Daylight is assuming we want to render all the shots into a single MXF file, and it will name that file using the current scene name. Now that might be okay if I wanted to produce a single movie for review, or if I was creating a master deliverable file for distribution. However, in this case, I want to create a graded transcoded copy of each of my input shots along with its synced audio. The easiest way to specify this is to click on the Input File Name button. Now you can see that the first rendered file will have the same name as the first source shot in the shots view. However, the scene name is still being appended, so I'll just remove that by deleting it from this field. Now the output file name will be the same as the input file name, which means that as each new shot is rendered, it will be given the same file name as the original source. The only thing which will be different is the file extension, of course. Note also that the Avid MXF wrapper actually requires video and each audio track to be rendered into a different file, with a V1 or audio track number appended as appropriate. Right, we're ready to submit the render now, but there are a couple more things I should do first. If there is an error during rendering, perhaps a corrupt frame for example, I can decide what the system should do. In this case, I just want to render a black frame and continue. Also, to double check that all the required source frames are accessible, I can click on the Verify Render button. Okay, everything looks good, so I'll submit this render to the queue. The queue requires a name, so we can identify this operation in the list. So I'll just accept the default this time and click the Submit button. The render operation has now been added to the render queue and has been picked up by the render manager on this machine. If I had other networked systems, such as another Daylight, a Baselight system, or a dedicated render node such as the one in a Flux store, then I could have submitted the render to the queue on one of those machines instead. They would then pick up the operation and render it to the required destination. That could be very useful, as it would free up all the local processing resources on this system. At the moment, you can see that the operation is in progress and should take about an hour to complete. However, if I want to carry on working on this machine, the rendering will pause whenever I need to play back or adjust a grade. This is because there's only a single GPU in this Mac, and it can only process one image at a time. However, as soon as I stop playback, the rendering operation will continue again. You can manually pause the rendering operation or stop it altogether using these buttons in the Queue Manager. If there are multiple jobs queued, you can change their order of priority by dragging them up and down the list. If you want details of a rendering operation, you simply have to click on it in the Queue Manager, and a log appears at the bottom. Logs can also be saved out to a file if required. Okay, the rendering process is now finished. So let's just take a quick look at the files it's created. I'll open the sequence browser using Ctrl B and select the output directory on the Thunderbolt RAID. So here are the MXF files. You can see the metadata burn-in, and if I press play, you'll notice that it only lasts for the first second. You can also see that the MXF file contains the same metadata as the original source file. Now, setting up all those options in the render view can be a bit of a lengthy process, and you wouldn't want to do that every time you rendered. Therefore, the settings can be saved as a deliverable set. Once saved, the settings can be recalled at any time by choosing them from the Apply Deliverable Set drop-down here. It's also possible to create multiple deliverables in one go. For example, I could simultaneously create a set of offline files for editorial and a single QuickTime file for production review. I would set up the second deliverable on another tab here, and then I could save both as a single deliverable set, which when added to the render queue would produce both deliverables at the same time. But I'll cover that in more detail in one of the advanced tutorials. Okay, that job's now done. I can send the Thunderbolt drive over to editorial and they can start to edit this episode using the graded sync dailies I've just produced. Another very important output from Daylight is the shot report. This is a document containing details about all the shots or a selection of shots in this scene. I'm going to switch over to another workspace which contains the reports view. This is a custom workspace I created myself, but you can also open the reports view by selecting it from the Views menu. The report will be generated from the shots present in the current shots filter, and the order of shots in the report will follow the current sort order of the shots view. I can choose whether I want to export the report as columns of data in a CSV file or as a PDF document. If I select PDF output, then I can use the options on the left of the report view to set up a cover page and summary pages, and also choose how the details of the shots should appear. A preview of the PDF report is shown in the main part of the reports view, and I can step through the pages using these buttons. Once I'm happy with the report presentation, I can save it using the Export or Export As buttons. I can also open it in the Max Preview app by clicking on this button. These settings are saved as a template, which I can use to generate other similar reports. Several different report templates can be set up by adding new ones here. In addition to generating reports, Daylight can also output metadata from a scene in many other ways. For example, an EDL or a shots log can be exported in several different formats, including Avid's ALE format, which enables the easy transfer for all the metadata for each shot. Grading and look information can be exported via a color decision list or CDL, a series of 3D LUTs, or as a set of BLG or Baselight grade files. These options all provide a means to support a renderless workflow, which can lead to huge savings in both time and storage space. Examples of renderless workflows using BLG files are covered in other tutorials on our website. So that just about wraps it up for this introductory series on Daylight. Please be sure to check back regularly for other Daylight and Baselight tutorials covering specific features and techniques. Thanks for watching.